Boom! We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Nolan Hawkeye Anthony YouTube channel. And I thank all of you for being here, wherever you may be. And of course, however you may be listening. Of course, the Iowa Hawkeyes had a bye week, but I am continuing with our Big Ten Whip Around show, regardless of whether the Hawkeyes play or not. This video will not be as long as most of these Big Ten Whip Around shows are, just by virtue of Iowa not playing. But I did want to provide some analysis, just a little bit, of what happened this weekend in the Big Ten, where things stand after this last week, and take a look at the top 25 plus. As per usual, take a look at my Big Ten power rankings. But before we get into any of that, I want to ask you guys to hit that subscribe button, support your boy, at the very least, like, comment, share. You guys know the drill. If you guys want to donate, support the channel, you guys absolutely can support your boy's coffee habit. Well, without further ado, let's dive into this. So I think before we even get into anything, I think the week pretty much went as expected, pretty much status quo. You know, some of the games were perhaps closer than expected. You know, Wisconsin losing to Ohio State by 14 points, I think, was about as good as they could have hoped for. And, you know, I think if you're a Wisconsin fan, while it sucks that you lost, you know, it's respectable that you only lost by 14 points, okay? And you held Ohio State to below 30 points. The bottom line is the Big Ten West is probably the worst conference when it comes to offense. Iowa is terrible. Wisconsin is slightly better than Iowa, but they're not good. And you just go down the list, and that's pretty much the case. You know, you might see a few performances here and there that weren't, you know, terrible, but it's a defensive division. Okay. Now, let me take that back. Maybe not conference, it's a division, but they are a part of the Big Ten, and it's just remarkable. So, you know, Wisconsin hung with Ohio State. They were down 10-3 at half, and the game remained very, very close all the way up until the fourth quarter. I mean, it entered the fourth quarter 10 to, let's see, 17-10. One score game, one touchdown game. And of course, Wisconsin just was not able to get anything going in the fourth quarter, and they lost. Again, Penn State beat Indiana, bouncing back from their loss to Ohio State. I wonder how long it's going to take. I'm not sure if it will ever happen, but I am curious to see if Penn State fans and just kind of Penn State at large starts to get into this kind of like what we see in the SEC with like Texas A&M, Tennessee, you know, where they're a really, really good program historically, and even right now they're a solid program. But they're staring into this abyss of, like, just using the SEC teams for an example, of Alabama, Georgia, and schools like that, and asking themselves, how do we become that? And you know, it's a really tricky spot to be in as a fan, wanting more than perhaps the school is able to produce, but you think it can happen, and being content with what they currently have. So I wonder if that's ever going to happen at Penn State with James Franklin. You know, time will tell. But the game was closer than expected. You know, the fact that Indiana, who is 2-6 on the year, 0-5 in the Big Ten, only lost by 9 points, I think, you know, says a lot. Indiana really was able to put More points than anybody expected. I think most people thought that this was going to be a butt whooping, but Brendan Sorsby had himself a day. 13 of 19, 269, 3 tubs, 1 INT. You know, in a lot of regards, he actually had a better day than Drew Allard did. And considering Penn State was actually going against a worse defense than Indiana did against Indiana's offense going against Penn State's defense, it's pretty remarkable the day that Brendan Sorsby was able to have. They really couldn't get anything on the ground, whereas Penn State, was pretty balanced all the way around. And that's essentially it, guys. I mean, it definitely was an interesting game. They still won. And ultimately, that's what matters. It wasn't the prettiest of wins, but considering, if you take into account, and this is not an excuse, but I do think that context does matter. If you take into account that, Penn State lost the previous week in a very emotional, hard-fought, physical game, I could see how they were not as up to the challenge in this game as maybe they were against Ohio State. Moving along here, Northwestern got the stunner. This would probably be the only stunner. Northwestern is absolutely having a better season than most people predicted. I mean, it is astonishing because they were terrible last year and they lost a lot of people last year. I mean, it wasn't as though they returned a bunch of people from a terrible team and they were a year older. I mean, this was, now Northwestern has recruited better. Okay, I will say that. So the talent up and down in theory is better and further along by way of just recruiting better in the high school ranks and things like that. And I'm sure Northwestern did bring some people in from the transfer portal, but I don't think anybody would have expected Northwestern to be 4-4 at this point in the year and 2-3 in the Big Ten. And, they've actually had some decent victories. They really have. This would be the only surpriser. It's not surprising to me. I have told you guys all year long, and you guys know I have. Okay, don't call me on it. I have. That Maryland had not played anybody. Maryland and Rutgers had not played anybody. And so it was very difficult to judge the true quality of their team. And I know, I've even said this with regards to Iowa. You can only play who's on your schedule. And that's true. That is a fact. You absolutely can only play who's on your schedule. But still, if we're looking at it objectively, it was like, well, who have they played? Now Northwestern did lose to Rutgers in the first game of the year. So if you look at the losses that Northwestern has had, they lost to Rutgers, who's an above 500 team. They lost to Duke, who's an above 500 ranked team for much of the year. They beat Minnesota, who is now a part of a 4-way tie in the Big Ten. And technically, Minnesota is actually first because they beat Iowa. They haven't played Wisconsin. I think, they haven't played Nebraska yet either, I don't believe. I'd have to check. And Iowa beat Wisconsin. So technically, if the season were to end today, Minnesota would be in the Big Ten championship game. They lost to Penn State. Not a surprise there. The one game that I think they would like to have back is the game against Nebraska. And, I really think that Northwestern beating Maryland really points to where the Big Ten is at, okay? And this is why I always, when I do my power rankings, I always do it in a tier system because it illustrates what the Big Ten really is much better. The Big Ten, and in particular the divisions, it's illustrated even more when you break it down by division, but there's tier 1 of Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. You have tier 2 of the good teams, not great, but good teams. Then you have the average, maybe even slightly below average. And then you have the below average teams. And, if you look at the East, it's still top heavy. Whereas the Big Ten West, you can make more of a case that it's more solid top to bottom. They don't have the top dogs that the Big Ten East has when it comes to the national landscape, but top to bottom, they're a little better off. So, this game for Iowa, when I do the game preview, now the good news is it's at home, but as you guys will see, Iowa, just like they did against Minnesota, will make this game closer. That, maybe I will change my prediction by the time I do the game preview, but they will make this game closer than it needs to be. Northwestern, this game will be at Northwestern. Okay, this will be on the road. Iowa historically has had some tough outings traveling to Illinois. So this game is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a cakewalk for Iowa. Okay, this is looking to be potentially a trap game for the Hawkeyes. Okay, and that is why even when Iowa beat Wisconsin, I continue to, guys, look at me. I said I was going to talk about Iowa too much, but I can't help it. That is why even then I said things need to improve on offense. They need to, because Iowa will not make the Big Ten championship game. Yeah, they may have beat Wisconsin on the road, but they could just as easily lose 3 straight because of how brutally terrible the offense is. So congrats to Northwestern on that victory. 4-4. I think a lot of people had said that they'd be lucky to win 4 games this year, and they've already done it. I think if you're Northwestern, your goal at this point should be to win 5-6 games. I think if Northwestern can muster 5-6 wins, that it will be considered a positive, successful season with everything considered for Northwestern. Minnesota beat Michigan State. Not really a surprise there. Michigan State is in shambles, 0-5 in the Big Ten. So, Michigan State went to, he's either a true freshman or I believe their transfer quarterback went down. They turned to Caton Hauser, who Iowa was actually in on, to try and get his commitment. And, what is there to say? I mean, Ethan Kaliakmanis had, an average game yet again. Jordan Newman had 204 yards. That is the story of this game, is the 204 yards on the ground for Jordan Newman. That is incredible. Congrats to him. That's probably one of the best performances in the Big Ten this year, running for 200 plus yards. And you look at Minnesota and, aside from Iowa, I think that they have, well, I take that back. They almost assuredly have a loss to Ohio State. Okay, that's the good news for Iowa. But outside of that, these are all winnable games. Now, if I had to predict right now, I think the game against Illinois will be a tricky one, and I would not be surprised in the least if Illinois beats them. But if I had to guess right now, I think that Minnesota finishes 2-2 in their final 4 games of the season. And that would get them a 5-3 conference record and a 7-5 overall record. And yes, they did beat Nebraska. So they have the tiebreaker over Nebraska. So, and the last game, Nebraska beat Purdue. They now sit at 5-3, 3-2 in the Big Ten. I think it's really hard to judge Nebraska because they really haven't had that difficult of a schedule. The two teams that they have played that are legit teams they lost to are decent teams. They got smacked by Colorado. They got smacked by Michigan. I think that they have, next to Iowa, one of the easier schedules in the country. And, if I had to guess right now, I would say that they probably finished 2-2 as well, finishing 5-3 in conference and 7-5 overall. And I think that would be a positive season for Nebraska compared to what they had been. So that's all you can really ask for. To close this out here, before we go to the top 25, I just want to show you guys the Big Ten standings. Like I said, it is, Michigan, Ohio State on top of the Big Ten East. Ohio State owns the tiebreaker over Penn State. And in the Big Ten West, it's a 4-way tie for first place. Minnesota is technically first because they own the head-to-head tiebreaker over Iowa. Of course, Iowa has the better overall record, but still. So last but not least, we will look at the top 25. Probably the biggest upset would have been Kansas defeating Oklahoma. Georgia beat Florida by 23 points. That's a great victory for them. Florida State shellacked Wake Forest. That was a pretty solid victory for them. Anytime you can beat a 500 or above team, that's a pretty good win. Washington was able to defeat 2-6 Stanford. And Kansas with the upset 5-point victory. I mean, we're not talking just 1 point, 2 point. We're talking a 5-point victory over Oklahoma. They were down 21-17 at half, and Kansas just had the better response. And, I think Kansas is a perfect example that you can find ways to beat some of these powerhouse teams. You can. And Kansas does not recruit better than Iowa does. They don't recruit better than Wisconsin does. And yet they just beat Oklahoma. Okay. Now they were at home, it looks like, but it can be done, guys. So congrats to Kansas for that victory. Oklahoma, I think, will struggle to get into the playoff now because of that loss. Just for shites and gigs, let's take a look at the Big 12 standings. I always like to see how Iowa State is doing. Iowa State has responded well. And to tell you the truth, I'm happy that Iowa State has done well after losing to Iowa, because it just makes Iowa look better after defeating them. And that was one of the things I was going to say about Iowa in general is the schedule, as I said before the season, you have to wait to see how things shape up, but the schedule has actually appeared better than it looked like before the season started. Northwestern is better. Nebraska isn't too bad. Wisconsin has had a solid year. The only really dominant team Iowa had on the schedule is Penn State, but they have a lot of just average to solid teams on their schedule. Iowa State is 5-3 now, and they are in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-way tie for first place. And, they have a big one against Kansas. I think that'll be a great measuring stick for them this year. I don't think Iowa State has had the toughest schedule, Iowa, Oklahoma, but other than that, Baylor is not very good this year. Cincinnati is not very good this year. TCU, not very good this year. As I said, they were not going to, when everybody was going crazy over Colorado beating TCU, I said, hold on, guys. They are not the same team that they were last year. Oklahoma State is not bad. So that was a good, that's probably their best victory this year is against Oklahoma State. So that's good. I don't, obviously I don't like Iowa State, but I do, after Iowa plays them, I do root for them to win because it just makes Iowa look better. And, I don't like Iowa only playing that game because it's an in-state rivalry. I want there to be some impact of playing them in a positive way, whether they lose to them or beat them, by way of Iowa State being decent. Let's see here. Texas beat BYU, pretty good victory for them. Oregon beat Utah, great victory for them. I saw somebody say that Utah's head coach was the best coach in the country. Forget who I saw said that. It was a pretty high profile person who said that. We already talked about Penn State. Arizona upset Oregon State. That's a pretty big upset as well. But Arizona State is 5-3. They are above 500, so they're a decent team. Ole Miss beat Vandy. Notre Dame beat Pitt 58-7. Georgia Tech upset North Carolina 46-42. Pretty good upset. Louisville beat Duke 23-0. Very surprising. Duke scored 0 points. My Air Force Falcons continue their undefeated season. They beat Colorado State 30-13. There were some snowballs that were thrown in the game, which were pretty funny. 15-yard penalty was enforced on that. By the way, guys, for sideline warnings and like sideline issues, the first penalty that is thrown on that is a warning. There's no penalty yards enforced, in hopes that it gets taken care of and it doesn't impact the game. Then the second one is penalty yardage. Tennessee beat Kentucky. That's a great victory for them. Tulane beat Rice. UCLA beat Colorado. Big story there was the targeting call for Deion Sanders' son. The whole targeting thing, guys, it's very difficult to talk about because it really depends on how you view the whole concept of targeting in the first place. Because I think there's a lot of people who base their entire assumption or everything they say about it is based off of their thoughts that football is football. People are going to get hit and there should be no protection on it. And, especially guys on, there's a lot of people who are like, I saw Joel Klatt. He's an offense guy. He played quarterback, who said it was a terrible call. But there's a lot of guys who play on defense who say, well, that's unfair to the defense. How can you tell a defender who's going 100 miles an hour and playing full speed to slow up for a tackle? And it's like, that's a great point. That's an excellent point. That's true. I totally understand that. And then conversely, okay, are you going to look at it based off of the letter of the law? Okay. And I think those two things give two distinctly different responses. I would say that it probably was targeting based off of the letter of the law. High school, we would definitely call that helmet to helmet contact. Now, conversely, in high school, massive athletic plays like that don't happen very often because the athletes just are not as athletic. But 9 times out of 10, that's going to be called helmet to helmet. And, just in general, guys, I'll be the first to say it depends from official to official, and in a lot of these calls, there's this tremendous, especially in football, I have found. In basketball, it's not as much the case, but in football, it is. There's this tremendous amount of gray area that exists where you know, some people emphasize more of whether the shoulder was leaned forward, whether the helmet was up, whether the contact was made from the crown or from the, below the face mask to the crown. The main thing I would say in my experience that most officials look for is whether the head is down, whether they are leading with their head down and their face mask down. And now if they're making a play with their helmets up, you know, so it's a really tough situation, guys. USC had 1-point victory over Cal. You know, I think Lincoln Riley needs to get some defense over there. They are not where they want to be quite yet. Cal loses to USC after a failed 2-point conversion. They went for it all. And James Madison beat Old Dominion. Lastly, guys, you know, let's look at my Big Ten tier system here. You know, not I wouldn't say a ton has changed. You know, I think I'm gonna move Northwestern, though. I'm gonna move them to the top of tier 4. And we'll go ahead and erase that. I'm very close to moving them with Illinois in tier 3. I want to go back here. I want to see what the Big Ten standings are. Matter of fact, I'm going to, because Illinois is 3-5, and I think I have left them Illinois there for a little too long. So I'm going to move Illinois to tier 4. So we're going to do Northwestern here. And we'll go Illinois here. Oh, great. Word wants to do a bunch of nonsense. And I think I'm going to move Maryland down and Minnesota up. So that's where we are going to be at. So that's it, guys. I feel good about everything else. Keeping Ohio State there. So we have Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, tier 1, tier 2, Iowa, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Minnesota, tier 3, Maryland, Nebraska, Northwestern. I mean, I'm close to moving Northwestern above Maryland since they beat them the way they did. Quite frankly, guys, honestly, I mean, I'm really considering it. I mean, they only have one more win than Northwestern, and Northwestern does have the head-to-head victory over them. So, and they're both 2-3 in the Big Ten. So I'm very close to that. That's probably the only issue I have is whether to have Northwestern ahead of Maryland. I do also think I'm going to move Nebraska ahead of Maryland for now. As well. So that's it, guys. I think I'm going to keep Northwestern there for now. We'll see what happens next week. And that is that. All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching the Big Ten Whip Around show, plus the review of the top 25 scores. I want you guys to consider hitting that subscribe button at the very least. Like, comment, share. You guys know the drill. And without further ado, DBAP, don't be a pussy willow. In fact, our feelings, because your feelings just don't matter. Love you guys. See you guys next time. Go Hawks. Bye.